I never thought I'd end up here. Then again, who plans on being half frozen, caffeine deprived, and questioning the fabric of reality at a remote outpost in the middle of who knows where Alaska? But here I am, talking to mice and pretending there's nothing weirder than the weather in these parts. So I took this job because city lights burned me out. Also, my roommates' half-cocked acoustic renditions of 90s grunge hits were testing the limits of human endurance. I figured isolation would be a good fit. I answered an ad that needed someone with strong survival skills and a resilient disposition. Sounded like my last relationship, so why not? Now, if you're picturing a cozy, snow-covered cabin with smoke curling up from a quaint chimney, stop right there. This outpost looked more like a shipping container than someone's winter fantasy. Slapped together with old panels of metal and surrounded by an endless vista of frosted nothingness, it was more Mad Max than Winter Wonderland. Inside wasn't much better. The smell hit me first, a mix of diesel and damp that gets up in your clothes and makes friends. My new boss, Keith, was a walking flannel advertisement with a beard you could lose a badger in. He handed me a cup of what he called coffee, but was closer to engine sludge, and began to run down the crucial survival rules. "This ain't no summer camp," he said. Keith loved stating the obvious. Weird things kicked off right away, subtle like the wrong note in a familiar song. The first was the way the light moved in the sky, sluggish and hesitant like it wasn't sure this part of the world was worth the effort. Then, the electronics, my phone, the outpost's radio, even the satellite phone began to pick up static. Like whispers, only you'd look up expecting someone, only to find your own breath-forming clouds in the cold air. Keith had rules about the electronics. Rule 3, specifically, don't trust anything with a battery after sundown. I thought it was a joke until I caught him throwing salt over his shoulder when he walked past the solar panels. Didn't have a clue what to make of that. Then there were the mice, or what I thought were mice, scuttling inside the walls at all hours. Unsettling, yes, but what got me was how they'd stop whenever I laid my ear against the cold metal to listen, like they knew. The silence pressed in, heavy, waiting, until I backed off. But nothing topped the smell that came every evening like clockwork from the direction of the woods. It was sweet, sickly sweet, a rotting perfume that didn't belong in the barren frost. Keith simply nodded when I mentioned it, adding nothing, his face giving away nothing. Another rule emerged: don't follow scents outside. Work to task, mind to task. Then he'd look at the tree line, to the shadows between the trees, as if expecting something or someone. The straw that broke me was what happened last Thursday evening. I'd settled into a kind of routine by then, if you could call it that, counting hours by chores instead of ticks of a clock because time here didn't seem to flow right. I was out by the makeshift scrap heap, chucking out what remained of our weekly supply crate, when I caught sight of something in the snow. At first, I wrote it off as tricks of the light or a shard of ice. But curiosity, that traitorous impulse, got the better of me. Buried under a thin layer of fresh powder was a small, stark white bone, rounded and worryingly humanoid. Child-sized, delicate. I felt my stomach drop, the cold biting through my jacket as if it suddenly knew I was there and wanted me gone. The bone, stark against the darkening snow, seemed to pulse, an invader in this frozen desert. As I stood there, that sickly sweet stench rolled in stronger than ever, drowning out the sharp, clean scent of winter air. It wasn't just the cold that made me shiver then. Dragging the bone back to the outpost, ready to confront Keith with it, my hand went for the container door, only to stop dead as a faint scratching echoed from the other side, persistent, wanting in. The scratching intensified, a relentless, grainy sound that seemed to claw not just at the metal of the door, but at the edges of my sanity. I backed away, heart thudding painfully against my ribs, my breath crystallizing in small puffs of panic in the air. The bone in my hand, once a curiosity, now felt like an anchor, pulling me deeper into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I dropped it, hearing it clatter on the icy ground. The sound seemed to fuel the scratching, making it frenzied, desperate. I should have called out to Keith then, demanded explanations for the bone, for the scratching, for that cloying, death-sweet smell that soaked through the freezing air. But fear rooted me in place, my voice strangled silent in my throat. I took a hesitant step forward, my eyes fixed on the door, waiting for whatever horror lay behind it to burst forth. There was a sudden lull in the scratching, replaced by a soft, almost plaintive whining. It sounded almost like, no, it couldn't be, I thought. But the small, terrified part of my brain whispered, an animal, maybe a dog, trapped and desperate asterisk. The rational part of my mind scoffed, reminding me that no living thing aside from Keith, and I should be present in this forsaken winter wasteland. Compelled by a mix of adrenaline and a pitiful hope that perhaps I could help, maybe find a stray Arctic fox caught in some cruel trap, I reached out again, slowly turning the cold handle. The door creaked agonizingly as I pulled it open, bracing myself against the wind that fought to whip it from my grasp. Peering inside, the dim light from the outpost's single flickering bulb cast long shadows that danced across the walls. My eyes took a moment to adjust to the scant light, and then I saw it. Not an animal, not anything I could have expected. In the far corner of the container, a tangle of wires thrashed weakly, sparking as they made contact with the metal walls, issuing a burnt electrical smell that mixed horrifically with that sickly sweetness I couldn't escape. My mouth went dry. This was wrong. It was all wrong. The wires seemed almost organic in their movements, like tendrils searching blind and hungry. I couldn't understand, didn't want to understand what I was seeing. My skin crawled with revulsion, and an overwhelming urge to flee seized me, yet my feet remained planted, betraying me. A weak groan emanated from behind those shifting wires. Pushing past my revulsion, I moved closer, and what I found nestled in the wire-infested darkness was a body, or what was left of one. Gray, gaunt, and partially fused with the twisted mass of technology. Keith's radio, the one he was never without, lay beside the figure, its static merging seamlessly with the soft, pitiful noises the person or creature made. Panic gripped me tighter, and it took everything I had not to scream. That's when the realization hit, freezing my blood colder than the air outside. This was Keith, or at least had been. How long had he been here like this? What had led him to this end? There were no clear answers, only more dread as the implications began to crowd my thoughts. Backing out of the container, I fought to regain my composure, to think through the nauseating horror. What had caused this transformation? Was it an accident or something deliberate? Questions spiraled, each more horrifying than the last, as I retraced my steps back to the main part of the outpost. Suddenly, the same scratching sound filled the air again, more demanding this time. It wasn't coming from the container now, but from the direction of the outpost. Cold realization washed over me. This nightmare wasn't confined to one spot. It was spreading, or perhaps it had already spread. My mind raced as I approached the outpost, the scratching growing louder with each step. I paused at the threshold, every instinct screaming at me to run, to not open that door. But I needed answers. Swallowing hard, I pushed open the door, the sound of my own ragged breathing loud in my ears over the ceaseless scratching. Just as the door swung open, the power cut out, plunging me into darkness. The scratching sounds engulfing me, echoing around me in the pitch black, a symphony of terror with no discernible source. And then something touched my ankle. It was soft, nearly tender, but with an unmistakable chill that seeped through my sock, instant and alarming. My heart skipped, lodged itself in my throat as I snapped my leg back. There, under the morose flicker of the old hallway light, nothing was visible, just the absence of whatever had reached for me. I pressed myself against the cool, peeling wallpaper, my fingers digging into it as if I could fade into its abstract patterns and disappear from whatever hunted me. The air felt dense, like breathing through a damp cloth, each inhale a labor. I tried to listen over the pounding of my own heart, straining for any sound that would confirm I wasn't alone. The silence seemed to stretch, elastic and unyielding, before a soft scuffing echoed down the hallway behind me. My gaze snapped to the intersection, where the dark hall turned darker still, but it was like staring into a void that stared back, unblinking. The urge to run was a wild, silent scream in my veins, but memories flashed, a warning. Just last night, old Mrs. Henley from next door had whispered through her teeth about the night creepers, her eyes clouded over with cataracts and conviction. Said they were drawn to the panic, the frantic beating of a heart like moths to a flame. I had dismissed her tales as the eccentricities of old age. A misjudgment, perhaps a dangerous one. Forcing a shallow breath, I edged forward, each step deliberate to avoid any sound. My mind played tricks, the shadows morphing with each blink, a psychological torment self-imposed by my frightened brain. And as my hand reached for the banister at the end of the hall, a whisper of movement stirred the air. A low, sorrowful moan filtered through the house, crawling under my skin, settling in my bones. It wasn't a draft. The windows had been painted shut years ago, the caulk like cement. I paused, my hand freezing on the banister. The sound wasn't right, not the wind, not the house settling. It was almost human, almost a cry. My teeth caught my lip, biting down until I tasted the iron tang of fear blood. Mrs. Henley's voice echoed faintly, a remembered warning. They mourn what they've lost and what you've still got to lose. The air dropped in temperature, a sudden frost biting at my exposed neck, and the horrid realization dawned that I was being herded, pushed by my unseen follower towards somewhere they wanted me to go. Turning back wasn't an option. Forward was a gamble. Every horror story screamed at me to not go down the stairs, to not head into the basement, the heart of most homegrown terrors. But that seemed to be where I was subtly, silently being directed. At the top of the stairs, I peered into the gloom below, the single bulb at the bottom casting more shadows than light. There my childhood fears lurked, of monsters clad in darkness, of whispered voices that weren't just echoes of my imagination. And now, faced with the creeping reality, those fears crystallized into a cold, hard lump in my stomach. A sudden noise, sharp and close, a creak from the very bottom step. It tore through the silence, precise and clear. My eyes squinted, tried to make out shapes, but it was like looking into deep water. You knew something was there, just not what. With a breath that trembled despite my efforts to control it, I began to descend. Each step creaked under my weight, each sound a betrayal of my position. A cold draft wrapped around my ankles, stronger now, more assertive, as if the house itself exhaled a chilling sigh. Halfway down, a sudden, sharp pain seared through my ankle, the spot that had been touched. I stifled a cry, clamping my mouth shut, as the thin, sharp sensation burrowed deeper, like tendrils crawling under the flesh. The pain spiked, a fierce reminder of the unseen horrors lurking just out of sight. I reached the bottom, my heart thundering, my breath a series of shallow catches. Ahead, the basement stretched, old boxes, discarded furniture, memories covered in dust and cobwebs. Among these benign neglects, shadows moved with purpose, clustering in corners, stretching up the walls. The bulb flickered then, a nauseating strobe that threw every shadow into sharp relief, each one seeming to stretch toward me with claw-like fingers. Then the light steadied, and I saw it not a shadow, not a trick of the light. A form, small and hunched, its outlines too jagged to be human, its movement too deliberate to be mistaken for anything but real. And then it looked up, two hollows where eyes might once have been, a smile that was too wide, too knowing. A step forward was all it took to shatter the spell of stillness. It moved toward me, and I knew running was no longer an option. As the creature advanced, the soles of my shoes scraped against the gritty floor, echoing in the cavernous space like a chorus of desperate whispers. Every instinct screamed to flee, but my limbs felt embalmed in an invisible resin, heavy and uncooperative. The air grew thick, as if the darkness itself was congealing, winding around me in suffocating tendrils. The creature's movements were jerky, unnatural, as if it were being yanked forward by unseen strings. Each time its foot, or something akin to a foot, settled on the ground, a soft, squelching noise filled the room. It was the sound of wetness, of saturation, as though it trod on the innards of the world itself. This sound punctured the stillness with grotesque precision, making my stomach churn. I backed up slowly, my heart pounding a frenetic rhythm against my ribs. The dim light from the overhead bulb flickered as if in warning, casting elongated shadows that danced around the perimeter of the walls. The creature loomed larger with each hesitant step I took, its form ambiguous yet distressingly humanoid. "What do you want?" My voice cracked as I spoke, the words dissolving into the stale air, unacknowledged. It didn't reply, couldn't perhaps, but it paused, head tilting in a grotesquely inquisitive manner. For a horrifying second, our eyes locked. Its eyes, if they were eyes, shimmered like slick oil on water, reflecting a tortured abyss back at me. In that gaze, I recognized nothing familiar, nothing soulful. Just an empty expanse that clawed at the edges of my sanity. Suddenly, the creature lunged, closing the gap between us with startling agility. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet in my panic. My back hit the wall hard, dull pain radiating across my shoulder blades. Trapped, I slid down to the floor, my hands frantically clawing for anything that might serve as a weapon. My fingers wrapped around something small and metallic, an old pipe, perhaps discarded in a previous, forgotten maintenance. I brandished it like a sword, holding it out with trembling hands. "Stay back." The threat in my voice was undermined by the quiver that laced each syllable. The creature halted mere inches away, its breath foul and fetid, filling the air with the decay of things long dead. It cocked its head again, this time to the other side, as if puzzled by my action. I could hear my own breath, ragged and sharp, a stark contrast to its eerily silent respiration. It was then I noticed the slight shift in the atmosphere. The room felt colder, and not from any ghostly presence of the creature alone. From the corner of my eye, I saw it, frost creeping along the walls, a slow infestation of ice threading through cracks and crevices. The bulb overhead flickered once more before giving out completely, plunging us into an oppressive darkness. My skin prickled with the drop in temperature, goosebumps dotting my arms as my breath became visible, puffing out in panicked clouds. The darkness wasn't empty, but filled with the continued advancement of the creature. I could hear it moving, could feel the shift of air as it circled me, toying with its prey. I swung the pipe wildly, hoping to connect with something solid to ward off the inevitable. There was a soft thud, and the creature reeled back with a gurgling cry that sounded almost human. Almost. Energized by fear, I scrambled to my feet, clutching the pipe with frozen fingers. But as my eyes adjusted to the lack of light, I saw it wasn't down, not really. It recovered with a fluid grace that no living thing should possess, its silhouette now a blur of motion as it rounded on me again. The certainty of my end filled me, bitter and cold as the air that enveloped us. But just as it moved in, a shrill scream echoed through the room, not from me, nor from it, but from somewhere deep within the building. The creature stopped, head snapping toward the source of the sound. In that brief distraction, I felt a visceral pull, an animal compulsion to survive, and I ran. I ran as the creature briefly turned its attention away, and behind me, the sound of its pursuit resumed, a relentless, squelching echo in the frigid dark.